All right, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to How to Have the Talk with Your Parents. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to approach our aging parents to get a discussion going on how they wish to age in place, how you can best respect those wishes, and what kinds of legal documents that should be in place. Tonight, our presenters are Kathleen Summers, who is a nurse attorney for Generations Law Group, and Mel Horan. She's the VP of Sales at Northbridge Companies. So ladies, I'm going to let you get started. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Kathleen, would you like to start?
Thank you, Carol. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this very, very important conversation about how to start the talk with your parents. I'm Kathleen Summers, and as Carol said, I'm with Generations Law Group. I'm a nurse attorney and the founding partner for the firm. We focus on estate planning and elder law considerations and have offices in Acton, Sudbury, and Burlington. Mel?
Yes, thank you, Kathleen, and welcome everybody. My name is Mel Horan, and I am with Northbridge Companies. We own 18 senior living communities throughout New England and Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts. And I've been in senior living for about 34 years. I've been through helping a family member, a parent, an aunt, several friends, parents, through navigating what now as we enter retirement and beyond. So it definitely is an emotional journey, and one that in those 34 years I have experienced so much personally and professionally, and I look forward to sharing any kind of wisdom or thoughts I can this evening with you all. So thank you for being here. Honestly, if you have any questions at all, and for those of you that many of us have been on webinars and Zooms for a good 18 months now, please just go to the chat button and put in your question. Carol will be keeping a close eye on that. We'll answer any and all questions that you have. And certainly if there's something that you'd like to bring offline, we're happy to help you with that as well. Just put your name and telephone number into the chat, and Kathleen or myself would be happy to call you personally. Anything else to add, Carol or Kathleen?
No, absolutely. I agree with you, Mel. If people do have concerns or questions, please put them into the chat. And really, this is, although we're presenting on this material, this really is a discussion as well, hopefully with us all. So please feel free to add your comments or add your questions into that chat.
Right, good. So we'll get started. Many years ago, I realized that, we have all sorts of talks with our children. I remember the best way to talk to my kids was to take them in a car and take them for a ride. If it was something very important to talk about, go off somewhere very uninterrupted. But having the talk with your parents, having that role reversal of, as an adult child, talking to your parents is often foreign to us. And so this is a conversation that we sometimes put off. We plan so well throughout our life, but when it comes to talking to our parents about their wishes, and how their wishes might change with unexpected diagnoses or health changes, make it even more challenging to have. In that new chapter, when things like peace of mind, security, friendship, socialization, and care mean more than tangible things, it is so important to have a plan and not wait for an emergency. And ideally, which how many of us live in the ideal world, we have had this talk already, but many have not, and it's not too late. The reality is, it's hard, and most people are saying, I'm not quite ready to have that talk. And we'll wait until something happens. Some sort of a loss, the ability to drive, loss of a spouse, a fall, or increased forgetfulness. And Lord knows we saw many things happen throughout COVID-19 and some decline with our senior and elderly population. It's really just trying to have that conversation, that talk, if you will, when you're stress-free. So that's what we talk about in terms of the talk. And anything to add to that, Kathleen, just in regards of the talk itself? And
absolutely. It is a very difficult thing sometimes to approach within a family. And certainly you all know your family units, better than anyone outside. And thinking about when would be a good time. For sometimes we say, don't do it on Thanksgiving Day when everyone is there. But sometimes that is the time to say, look, can we put some time aside for this kind of conversation? And we'll talk a little bit more as we go through the presentation on how you might be able to open up that conversation and begin it. So a couple things to think about as you're going through the talk. Again, the ideal is to plan ahead, but also know that there is never a too late moment. You really do want to have this conversation as soon as you can, as soon as you, feel like it's important to begin discussing with your parents what their wishes are, and to be thinking for yourself too as you go forward. How would you be responding in these kinds of circumstances, and what's important to you to be able to share that information?
Absolutely, Kathleen. And I think, again, is there ever a right time? Not necessarily. And sometimes you'll just know it. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've learned over the years is, when you're having the conversation, and ideally you're having it while everybody is well, the one thing none of us really can imagine is the what ifs. What if I begin to get forgetful? What if my health declines? We don't necessarily think like that. And that sometimes, and that's why I encourage folks to try to have this conversation when you're well. As hard as it is to think that physically, cognitively, emotionally, we may not be the same person in 10, 20, 30 years. Oftentimes we find that. So I think it's really important to tie in, mom, if you were, and mom and dad, if you were, to make a change now, what are those wishes in your current state? But what if something happens? What if one of you had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's? What if one of you developed Parkinson's? Would you think any differently? I think that you've really got to set that framework up so that you talk about not just the now when you're feeling good and I'm healthy. I don't need to plan right now. And also just where the rest of the family stands. You don't want the first conversation to be when you're all together and it's a large family and there's different opinions, because then it becomes very stressful. There's got to be those kind of pre-conversations so that what does everybody think? Because the last thing you want is the conversation to happen and get those angry moments of, mom and dad should stay in the house forever, or, they want this, or I want the house. Those clarifying moments, need to be all thought out throughout as you're planning for this.
The other thing, I apologize, Mel, I didn't mean to cut you off. But the other thing we often tell our older clients when, we're helping them to understand the importance of having this conversation is that being able to share what is important to you with your children is critical, because that does give them the framework for the decision making that may need to happen. Sharing their values, sharing what is important to them with respect to medical care, to outcomes. It also helps to set the framework, as you said, Mel, for the other family members, so that, you really can say, no, this is what mom and dad wanted in this circumstance, because we all have our own thoughts about what should happen. But understanding what the person whom we are really charged with acting on their behalf is so important, so that we do it based on what they want, not what we would want, not what our siblings would want, but really what does our loved one want in this particular circumstance? So setting that framework is super important.
Absolutely. Great point. We often, and Kathleen touched on this, which was so important. When is the time, where, and who? And, when is, I always say the sooner the better. Again, we don't know what curveballs are going to come our way. We really don't. And, when having the conversation when mom has progressed with dementia or Alzheimer's, she can't make the decision. So if you've had the conversation prior to that, if there is some sort of, Alzheimer's or dementia in the family history, that's a trigger to start this sooner. If there is other health diagnoses that run in the family, that is a trigger to have these conversations early. My husband's family, his mom, his aunt, and his uncle all had Alzheimer's. And to this day, they say, gosh, we should have really come together before this. So that's a lesson learned for our generation, because I wouldn't want my children to go through what my husband's family did. So you've got to also look at your family history. So I know Kathleen has a lot to offer on this slide, so I'm going to turn it over to her as well.
Well, Mel, you're absolutely correct. And what we see with the when in particular, we oftentimes, unfortunately, deal with families who never did start the conversation or who unfortunately have waited too long. And then what we see oftentimes, again, they don't have a good framework in place for how decisions should be made, who should be making those decisions. They also they have oftentimes a feeling of guilt. I can't tell you how many times I'll have a family who, after they've been through a long stretch with a loved one who is now passed away, they've had to make some very difficult decisions, and they sit with a lot of guilt. Did I do the right thing? Is this what my loved one would have wanted? So again, one of the ways of approaching this kind of conversation with your parents is, this is going to give me more clarity about what's important to you. And then I can do what you want as much as possible. And so being able to approach the conversation with them about, I really want to do what you would like me to do in this situation. Help me here. Help me to understand is critical.
Kathleen, I just want to underscore what you just said, because that is in my world in senior living so important, because our seniors, our elderly, and our parents, the last thing they want to give up is their independence. So you're giving them a gift by having this conversation and letting them know, just as Kathleen so beautifully put it, that you want them to be in charge, but you can't let them be in charge unless we really know. Right. So by having that conversation at the right time enables them to maintain that independence of, this is what I wanted.
Yeah, absolutely critical. And it's also we'll talk a little bit more as we go through, but the who is also critical. And again, it's honoring your parents by understanding that framework, honoring what their wishes are, honoring who they want to be in those important decision-making capacities. A little bit of an aside, I sometimes am appointed by the courts to be a guardian for someone or to be a conservator for someone. This is to either make their medical decisions or to handle their finances. And this happens when a person has not done this planning ahead of time and made sure that they have legal documentation, et cetera, in place. When I step into those positions, I am stepping into the position with a complete stranger. I am dealing with someone's intimate medical decisions. I'm dealing with their finances, and I don't have that framework oftentimes, and sometimes don't have family that I am able to turn to gain some framework. So having these conversations, and again, approaching your elderly loved one, your aging parent with, please provide this to me, please have this conversation so I really can be the best for you if necessary.
Absolutely. And just finally on the place, you see it there, somewhere where you can laugh and cry and hug and talk comfortably. It's not a time to go to a busy restaurant and have this conversation. It is in a quiet area. I know when my husband's family had the conversation with his mom, she cried. She cried, but they were around their family kitchen table where they had so many beautiful memories throughout her entire life. And it was in a safe zone, a safe area where everybody could be together. They weren't in, you didn't have any distractions, and it was okay for Anne to cry.
That is so critical, Mel. Absolutely. And the other thing is that this doesn't have to be and shouldn't be a one and done conversation. This is a conversation that may take several tries, several attempts to really be able to get clarity. And also, it's one that you want to revisit during different times because decisions about things may change, feelings about things may change. So not a one and done. It's something that may take multiple attempts and certainly something you do want to revisit frequently to make sure that you do have that framework clear.
Kathleen
Absolutely.
and Mel, I have a question that came up in the chat box. Can you touch on if it's too late to ask them what they want? Mother has Alzheimer's. Stepfather is failing cognitively but will not admit it.
So if you don't mind, Kathleen, I'll start this one.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Mel.
I think, Carol, thank you. And to the person that's questioning this, first and foremost, I'm sorry, it's not an easy diagnosis. And I can tell you that joy can be had with Alzheimer's, but definitely you must be going through a lot. And the fact of the matter is, at this stage, if you've not had any discussions with your mom, and I think you said, Carol, stepdad or dad? Stepfather. Unfortunately, your mom is not in a position with her diagnoses to make any decisions. That's part of the disease process. So, you've got to realize, even if, mom said, I, want to stay in my house for the rest of my life, you have to ask yourself, when did she say that? Did she say that when she was 65 and well? Did she anticipate having a diagnosis of Alzheimer's? So what you need to do is come together as a family. And I don't know if your stepfather has family, but you've got to come together and have a family meeting without your mom and your stepdad. Because with your mother's diagnosis of Alzheimer's and the cognitive changes that you're seeing with your dad, as your stepdad, they're not in the position that they can make concrete decisions and the right decisions. So you all have to come together, get on the same page, and decide what's going to be best, where they're going to be safe, number one, where you're all able to get the peace of mind that you need, that you can sleep at night and not worry, and they truly can, where they can find joy and have a fulfilling life, albeit with their diseases. And again, might be one of those times, if you want to leave a name, myself or Kathleen could absolutely call you, because it's not easy. That's why we're having this webinar tonight.
Mel, you brought up a very good point. Sometimes too, we also have to understand, if we're in those important decision-making positions, that sometimes we can't honor fully what our loved one wanted. Maybe it is not, quite frankly, a safe choice to have someone stay at home. Now, certainly, you can work to take a look at, is this a practical thing? Is this a safe choice? Is this something that I can make happen? But you also have to give yourself permission that if it is not the right thing for them, that you may need to be able to instead find what is the best option for them to provide for safety, for well-being, for care and compassion for them. So even though that framework is put in place, it is not solid. It is not an absolute as you go forward. situations will change. And sometimes, even though your loved one said, I can't tell you how many times clients say, I'm gonna die in my home. I'm not leaving my house no matter what. And in the end, if we end up being the decision makers, we sometimes have to make hard choices, even if they are choices that don't necessarily reflect the pure decision to stay in the home, and that's the only thing that they would want. So I think you also have to be, forgiving of yourself if you need to make decisions that are different than the ones that were talked about, spoken about, given that situation back X amount of years or whatever ago, and understand that it is a fluid thing and you have to do what you believe is best. And Mel, I also agree with you that finding your support, getting your family, getting the people around you who can help to support and be part of this kind of team approach to making these decisions is the best way if you can, because you are going to need support as you go through, dealing with your aging parents. So Mel, you brought up the next, sorry, Carol, was there more?
Thank you very much. We can move on.
Wonderful, thank you. So Mel, you brought up this next slide talking about really multiple different categories that we've broken things into, talking about living wishes and what happens while someone is still alive, talking about what the future looks like, what would be their ideal situation. And again, that might be staying at home, being able to live in their house. Well, talking about what does the house look like? Is this a practical, thought that you can stay at home? Is it on one level? Do they have to go upstairs? Where is the bathroom? Where's the laundry room? All of those practical considerations, having the conversation about that and finding out what's important to them really. Then also looking at their health wishes. And this is really where some of the legal conversation comes into play. Do they have their healthcare proxy in place in which they're naming somebody who'll be able to step into their shoes to help with their healthcare decision making if they can't do so for themselves? Had they talked about their wishes should they end up needing things like feeding tubes and being on life support? All of that is important to understand as the proxy, because in Massachusetts, if somebody can no longer make healthcare decisions for themselves, we are going to look to see, has a healthcare proxy been put in place? And it's critical to have somebody named before they lose their ability to go ahead and participate in this decision making. And again, I talked a little bit about if someone can no longer participate in decision making and they haven't put a document like a healthcare proxy in place, we may have to involve a court and now have a guardian appointed. And what I try to tell my aging clients is that a failure to put the healthcare proxy in place really does leave it up to chance as to who might end up stepping into that role as your healthcare decision maker, and leaves them without that framework to make a decision based on the types of things that the aging senior would want. Another thing to know about here in Massachusetts, we have the HIPAA law. We do out throughout the country. It's privacy for your healthcare information, and putting in place a HIPAA document that outlines who you would be comfortable talking with your healthcare providers is important. And the last thing that we have in Massachusetts is called a MOLST form, MOLST. It stands for Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. This is actually a document that you do with your healthcare provider, and it can actually outline, have your aging loved one discuss with their physician, outlining some very important decisions about end of life, about things like the use of life support, the use of things like feeding tubes, etc. And so these are all legal documents that really should be discussed and put in place ahead of time if possible. Financial wishes is the next section really to talk about. This is where you utilize a durable power of attorney. Again, it's where your aging parent will name somebody who can step into their shoes to handle their financial life. That really allows them to handle everything but their healthcare decisions. So under a power of attorney, it can help to pay bills, handle investment accounts, retirement accounts, life insurance policies, etc. So putting that in place ahead of time is critical. And then you really want to have the conversation about dying wishes, about what would happen if there is a dramatic change in healthcare situation. And we're now talking about end of life decision making. And again, one of the things that I often encourage when I'm talking with children about how to approach this conversation with their parents is talking about how important it is to give me the framework to make that decision. Should I have to step into your shoes to be able to handle end of life decision making? It's difficult enough as it is. But with the framework, at least the child or the loved one who's being named in the position as a decision maker can move forward with, again, some continuity, some framework, some knowledge that they are doing things and making decisions based on their loved one's wishes. And then the last part kind of this circle of conversation is talking about wishes for after someone has passed. What's important to them? Do they have specific wishes around a funeral, about where to be buried? Again, these are not easy conversations to have, but they're critical. And I oftentimes tell my aging client that making these kinds of arrangements, even going down and making pre-arrangements with a funeral home, can really relieve the burden from their loved ones at the time of death and make it so much less complicated and less burdensome for them. So having, again, this conversation around from everything from what's important now to them, what's important while they're alive, through the discussion to end of life and even after death discussion.
Really helpful, Kathleen. Thank you. Thank you. And obviously, throughout having these talks and what, Kathleen just spoke about, it's heavy discussions, but they're so, so important. And often we are handling lots of resistance. And, I am a firm believer that throughout life, whether it's whoever I'm talking with, that sometimes the best way to answer a question is with another question. It helps clarify things. It helps us take a breath. And if you are talking about making a move out of their home that they've lived in for 40, 50, 60 years into a senior living community or something like that, when your mom says, why should I move? Just asking her, do you think things are going as well as they could be here, Mom? Is living in the house now the same as it was 40 years ago? And wait for the answer, because you might be surprised. Why? I'm not ready to make any move yet. I love to ask, what aren't you ready for? Because oftentimes when you say to somebody, what aren't you ready for? They might have a misconception of what exactly we're talking about, like a senior living community. So if you're saying, I think you should go into an independent or assisted living community, they may have a different perception in their mind of what that is. They may be thinking of a nursing home. They may be thinking of an old-fashioned old folks home. So ask the question, what aren't you ready for? And then, I don't think I'm doing, I'm sorry. You don't think I'm doing okay in my own home. I like to just say, is there anything that keeps you up at night? Or is there anything that you worry about when you're alone in this house? So many people went through so much isolation in the last 18 months. So some of these conversations are a little easier because many of us got a taste of, kind of being isolated. We got a taste of not having freedom. But oftentimes you could be lying in bed and the wind blowing on a window could be scaring the death out of our senior. So ask them, is there anything that you worry about when you're alone in this house?
Mel, it's funny that you should say that because we used to say in the office, nobody would ever choose to go into a nursing home facility in particular. And that is so untrue. I think part of it is our misconceptions. And we go in oftentimes to these conversations with a certain mindset that, of course, my parent would never want to leave their home and go into a community. And yet, when you do begin to delve down and talk about, as you said, what keeps you up at night, I have had many, many clients who say, being isolated is a concern for me. I really need people around me. It frightens me to be alone at night. It makes me very nervous about what would happen. What would happen if there was a fire? What happens if someone broke in? What happens if I fell? All of these kinds of worries. And so I think we have to be careful, as you said, Mel, about our own misconceptions, and we have to be willing to be open to the answers to these questions.
Absolutely. And this is one of them that I've thought so much about. And, a lot of times we'll hear somebody's resistance of making a move because they say, but I have so many memories here. And I've experienced firsthand through family, through clients that I've worked with, that oftentimes it's actually the memories of that home that is causing some depression and loneliness, because they keep remembering that maybe their spouse is gone and they're looking over at the chair that person doesn't sit in anymore. Maybe the children used to come and visit all the time, but the kids are adult children now scattered all over the country. Maybe they used to love to garden and they're not able to because, they've got arthritic knees or bad hips. So they're looking at a garden that is, grown over. So sometimes it's a very, very, emotional thing to say, but sometimes those memories could be just what is causing some of your depression and isolation. And, I've seen firsthand that turn around so beautifully that when somebody moves into a community and they're made new friends and they're sitting at a dining room table, and I've walked over and they've had these conversations of their Sunday dinners and bringing it alive, or the gorgeous perennial garden that they had and bringing that alive. So the thing about memories is, rather than making you sad, when you talk about things that are fun and beautiful in your mind, it makes you feel good, rather than just staring around your home and saying what's not happening anymore.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And Mel, one of the things too, as a little aside, my husband and I, after 25 years, just sold our family home. And I found out firsthand how difficult that move was. And, I am just in my late 50s, and add another 10, 15 years and how incredibly difficult it is. And yet, again, looking at, and we're going to talk about the misconceptions oftentimes that people have, but talking about, what is really getting in the way in terms of this move, or in terms of thinking about next steps, and is where you are really the most ideal place for you to stay, as independent as possible, as self-sufficient as possible, and enjoying your life to the fullest extent that you can.
Absolutely. And honestly, being in senior living for as long as I have, I will say, in all honesty, if I had $1 for every single time somebody said to me, gosh, I wish I had done this sooner. And I mean the actual senior themselves. I don't mean the adult children. I mean the senior. Once they settle in to a community, they set up their beautiful apartment home and they start to enjoy the lifestyle. If I had $1, I honestly wouldn't be standing here tonight in front of this webinar, because I would be sitting on some beautiful beach somewhere, because I'd have plenty of money, because honestly, it's one of those responses that I now just smile, because it just is so nice. And although there still are some misconceptions about moving, I don't ever want to downplay that, just like Kathleen said, moving out of your home, um, and my husband and I are in the same boat that Kathleen is. We're still in that home and talk about it all the time. But would it be emotional? Of course it would be, but we all, as life evolves, there are different chapters in our life. And, you know, the question is your home serving the same purpose as it once did?
Right.
Or is it pulling you down either financially or, maintenance wise, or memory wise and depression, so a lot of misconceptions are I'm going to lose my independence if I move into a senior living community or make a move like this. And honestly, people really gain independence back because they're not relying on other people. They're doing things on their own again.
Right. And Mel, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you see ever that there are times that people, quite frankly, wait too long to make this kind of decision? Is that sometimes part of the issue, that someone just waits too long to make the decision?
Absolutely, Kathleen. I will say, being, you know, we've gone through different phases of this, but there was a period in my career that moving to a community like this was only for a need. Something had to have happened. But what I have seen over the last 15 years, and certainly more so even over the last 5 years, is that it's become a want now. And there are some people that have just planned well their whole life. It's now a new generation moving, and they saw their parent live in a senior living community successful and all of the good that it did. But to your point, Kathleen, yes, it kills me today when I see a family that's in crisis, that is really, they're coming in, they need a lot more care. Or we have to say, maybe skilled care is better for you. That's not as often, but I sometimes will look at somebody that waited too long that's still going to benefit from the services that I think, gosh, you could have been living here for 3 years and been involved with clubs and making new friends and, exercising every day. So that's all part of the talk and part of this misconceptions, and I think part of the waiting too long is, number one, sometimes people don't think they can afford it.
Mhm.
And that's where, somebody like Kathleen or a financial planner comes in, because you really have to sit down, because it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. You have to sit down and look at what you're paying in your home now. And if you needed care to come in, if you need someone to come in and clean, if you need somebody to do the landscaping or the snow removal, all of the maintenance of your home. And never mind the fact that how much, burden is this on your children, the peace of mind for yourself or for them. So, I encourage people to really think about it and overcome the misconceptions, because you're getting people in their late 60s to their late 90s. And honestly, I've seen late 90-year-olds a lot more active than a late 60-year-old sometimes. So, it's not for old, frail people all the time. It really isn't. We have people that are still driving, that still volunteer, that still love to travel. And you know what? Do they only play bingo? Well, there are bingo in senior living communities, but my gosh, I love looking at our Facebook pages at our communities, because I just saw a group that went to the Cape Cod baseball games. We've had residents as a community of ours in Maine a gentleman wanted to always fly a plane. Well, he got up, he learned to fly a plane. We made it happen. We had other folks that wanted to ride horses. We have Tai Chi. I mean, it goes on. And honestly, it's not a place where you go to just die. It is a place to live your life to the fullest. and you are as private as you want to be. So those are some of the misconceptions that we see. And it's a mindset. Although I will say, again, now that there's new generations coming in and they've seen their parent live in a senior living community, those misconceptions are slowly getting resolved, but not all the way.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this leads me to, the power of language. And I'm a stickler about language because, oftentimes the adult child, many of you that are on this webinar this evening, are the ones that are going to present an alternative option to their parents. And it's important that you present it in the right way. There are facilities out there, but they're jails. There's nursing facilities. A senior living community, an assisted living community is not a facility. And I can't imagine there's many people on this webinar that would actually ever want to live in a facility. It's not a pleasant word. So and we also don't ever want to be put anywhere. So, I often just use the phrase to folks that I can't tell you how many times adult children will come in and talk to us and say, my gosh, this sounds fabulous. And we'll invite them to bring their mom or dad in or both. And they say, well, my family and I want to have the conversation first. And then we don't hear from them. And it really dawned on me one day that the reason why we don't hear from them again is because we haven't educated you as the adult child on how to have that discussion, how to use the right language. Because if you go back and say, gosh, mom, I finally went to that beautiful facility that's down the street. You know what? They have great rooms and I really want to put you there. Well, I have shut down halfway through that conversation. But if my adult daughter comes over to me and says, mom, I finally, after work, I decided to stop by that community and, they had beautiful apartments. And I think this might be a great option for you. I'd like for you to just join me in visiting this community. What do you think? So that language is so much different than I want to put you in a facility to live in a room versus there are options out there. I'd love for you to look at a community where there's lovely apartments and you could have the ability to meet new friends.
Right. And Mel, I think too, that that's so critical, language around all of these conversations. When you're talking, again, not saying, I need to know what happens if you get really sick and you can't make decisions for yourself, or, end of life, mom, what do you want me to do for your end of life decisions? These are, instead it's, what, you've asked me to be in this very important position for you, and I really do want to do this job well. If I have to step into your shoes, could you help me to understand better what's important to you? And I think continually turning around the discussion in that way is critical. It is about help me to understand how to best be there for you if that time comes. And thinking about language, thinking about how you're approaching the conversations really will make a difference in the conversation that you end up having with your aging loved one. And it will give you the framework that you need.
Absolutely, Kathleen.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, making it positive, so many things that Kathleen and I have brought up throughout this webinar. Times have changed. We have all changed, and we've all changed dramatically through COVID-19 as well. People are living longer, and doing more, and we have more options available to us. It's a great thing. There are options out there. And so when, we decide that maybe the home isn't serving the same purpose, decisions, on who's your healthcare proxy and who's your financial proxy and so forth. You got to choose the right person, but hopefully you have options. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize, Mel. No, I was going to say, you brought up, this whole idea that times change and that we're living longer and being open to options. again, this is another segue as to why planning early is so important, because the earlier people do plan, the more that people think about these things ahead of time, the more options that are open to them. Waiting to plan, waiting to have the conversation really does narrow what the options are as time goes on.
Absolutely. And I say to folks all the time, and this goes for the things that I've discussed as well as Kathleen, you know, I'm sure most cases parents have, your adult parents have made good choices throughout their life, whether it be, when they got married, their careers, buying their first home, having children, and all the other decisions that go throughout our life. Why stop when probably the most critical time in your life, and making a great plan and making great decisions, being proactive, allowing your children to be your advocates and making the right choices that you want for you. So having that talk, to bring it back home to having the talk, is so important.
Mhm.
And to be proactive and not be afraid of it. Bring in laughter, bring in joy, even when you're having the conversation. Make sure that you can make light of certain situations of, mom, well, you want to make sure that, my daughter gets the china cupboard, and whatever it might be, but bring some joy and laughter into it. My mother-in-law did the most incredible thing, and she started giving things away while she was still well. And you know, she loved it. She loved to know while she was living that some of her favorite pieces were going to be in her kids' home or grandchildren's homes, or our homes. So, these are all little tips. But, bottom line, don't be afraid to have the talk. Be proactive. Clearly, we already had a participant that is in a situation now that, she's wondering what to do now. Be proactive.
And I think too, think about yourself. So to kind of bring this home as well, we're talking about talking with our aging loved ones. Well, we are all aging too. And so you'll also have to think about for yourself and maybe face some of your own fears and misconceptions about all of this so that you can better help your aging loved one as you move forward.
Absolutely. And we allotted just about an hour for this, where we would welcome any questions you have. But like we said, I know Carol's watching that, both Kathleen and myself, if there are anything you're uncomfortable with asking in the chat, we would be happy to support you in any way we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. And want to thank everyone for participating. You really have taken the first step in having this conversation by even just listening to this presentation. So I hope this was helpful for you.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you so
Thank you.
much, everybody, for joining us. And I'll give everybody a minute if they want to put in anything in the chat box. But I've been copiously taking notes with my parents being, both my in-laws and my parents are all in their 80s. So this is very timely for me. And you would think, where I work at Generations Law Group, that I would know exactly what to say. But Mel, you really helped me understand by talking, like, I'm specifically thinking more about my dad because he's more resistant of all the parents.
Mhm.
And he's an in charge person. So I love, one of you said something about keeping them in charge by telling me what you want.
Right.
And I think he may very well respond to that. So I thank you for
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah. And I think, there's so many losses as we get older. The loss of, we downplay, losing your license, but that's, stopping driving. That's a huge loss. Loss
Huge.
of spouse, loss of friends. The last thing, and I'm such an advocate for people hanging on to their independence, because you never want to lose those independence.
Right.
And I mean that for folks that might have an Alzheimer's diagnoses. We were very mindful of that with my mother-in-law, or any other diagnoses. you don't want, there's enough that we have to lose as we get older. You don't want to lose that dignity, that independence, and that self-worth. That is critical.
Right. But one of the best ways I talk with my aging clients about keeping that independence is by planning, is by making sure that the people who will step into your decision-making capacity, if necessary, know what you want. Because how can they act and respect your wishes if they don't know what they are?
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We'll wrap that up there. And Kathleen and Mel, again, thank you so much for all your insight. And I think it was very helpful for all those involved tonight.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank
All.
you.
Be well.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.